welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to discuss decorative duplicate stitch. If you enjoy this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing. Duplicate stitch is a great technique for weaving in yarn tails, but you can use it on the right side of the knitted fabric as well. This is called decorative duplicate stitch. It's a great technique for fixing mistakes in color work, for adding little decorative details, or as an accent when used with intarsia, or fair isle or stranded color work. You can use it to add names or motifs to holiday items or other decorative items. The key goal when using decorative duplicate stitch is to make the duplicate stitch look as if it was knitted in. One tip is to choose a decorative yarn that is the same weight or a little bit thinner as the project yarn. If you use a yarn that is thicker or more heavily textured, the decorative duplicate stitch is going to impact the gauge of the underlying knitting. Another tip is to make sure you wash or block the yarns that you're using for your decorative duplicate stitch, especially if they are bright reds against a white or cream background. You don't want to do all this hard work and then the first time you wash your item, the duplicate stitch yarn bleeds. So make sure you soak that yarn first. Here's a sample swatch that used decorative duplicate stitch to make the design. The stitches are the same size as the underlying stitches. Decorative duplicate stitch does add some bulk because you're doubling the thickness of the fabric in those spots. So the elasticity will be affected a little bit, so keep that in mind. Our goal when working decorative duplicate stitch, in addition to having the stitches appear as though they were knitted at the same time as the rest of the piece, is to not have any twisted stitches. So these stitches should be the same size as the underlying fabric, and there should not be any twisted stitches. The way in which you work the decorative duplicate stitch will help you avoid these twisted stitches. When working decorative duplicate stitch, you want to leave a bit of a tail to weave in later when you begin. You will come out at the base of a stitch, which a stitch is a V. So you want to come out at the base of a V, leaving a bit of a tail on the wrong side of the work. If you're working vertical lines, we're wanting to duplicate these stitches. So follow the path of the yarn in the underlying fabric. And then go back down. If we're doing a vertical line, you will pivot up to come out of the bottom of the V in the stitch above. Now vertical lines, in order to make them look the best, you should alternate the direction that your needle travels. So now I will go from left to right. Like so. And then left to right. You can finesse the stitches to get them to lie nicely. When working horizontal lines, always move the needle in the direction of the line. Like so. This will avoid twisted stitches at the base of those stitches. It's usually best to work horizontal lines to fill spaces because it's easier to keep those stitches untwisted. Take your time and go slow. Diagonal lines should be worked similarly to horizontal lines in that you move your needle in the direction of the line. So I'll finish this stitch and I will pivot up one row to begin a diagonal line. This again keeps the base of those stitches untwisted because the direction the yarn is moving is away from the base in the direction that it would be moving if you were knitting it. Like so. When changing directions, either while working horizontal lines or diagonals, you need to anchor the yarn before you change direction. If you do not, the base of the stitch won't necessarily be twisted, but it will pull closed and not look open when the fabric is stretched. There are a couple ways you can anchor. The first way is to go in between the stitch, the last stitch that you worked with duplicate, and the next in that row below, and catch that bar like so. Now that stitch is open when the fabric is stretched. Now this method does leave a little blip showing through to the right side, when the fabric is stretched. But when the fabric is relaxed, it's not visible. And now that stitch is untwisted and we can change directions. Another way to anchor that stitch before changing directions is to do similar, but split the yarn in the back on the wrong side. This anchors that leg over to the side before we change direction. And make sure that that yarn isn't showing to the right side of the work at all. And now we can reverse direction. Don't pull those strands too tight. When weaving in the tails, again, don't forget to anchor that thread first. And then you can weave in on the wrong side, either using duplicate stitch and splitting the yarns and not worrying about traveling over the duplicate stitch area. Like so. Or reverse direction and weave in your tails in the area where the duplicate stitch was worked. Either way works. Just make sure you anchor that yarn so that the base of that last stitch doesn't close up. Make sure you don't split stitches while working the duplicate stitch method, and use a blunt tip tapestry needle. This was how to work decorative duplicate stitch. I hope it was helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.